Fear has no form. Fear has no name. But now, fear has an address. Castlevania Symphony of the Night for your PlayStation. From Konami.
I'm sold. Okay, so the 16-bit era was a rough time for Castlevania. Now, it's not to say that the games that came out during that time weren't fantastic, but they weren't doing all that well, save for Super Castlevania 4. This was primarily because Konami decided to abandon their fan base on the Nintendo and make a bunch of games for a bunch of different consoles. As a result, Rondo of Blood, Bloodlines, and a bunch of other games ended up flying under the radar of a lot of people. And then came the 3D revolution. Basically, during this time period, any franchise that existed during the 2D era had to make the jump to 3D, and Castlevania was no different. However, that jump to 3D was going to take some time, so in the meantime, and in order to satisfy fans as they waited for the 3D game, Konami put into production a smaller project for the PlayStation 1, one that would appeal primarily to pre-existing fans of the series. They intended for the game to be made very cheaply, make a little bit of money, but not do anything major at retail. They figured the game that was going to do that was the 3D game that they had in the works. However, on that team for that smaller project was one developer in particular by the name of Koji Igarashi, better known as Iga. Iga was a big fan of the series, but there have always been aspects of the Castlevania series that have frustrated him, namely the constant death by knockback. So he made a lot of recommendations during the production of the game, and the project leads were willing to take it to heart. This, coupled with the fact that everyone else who was working on the game was particularly passionate about it, resulted in a very high-quality product, far higher quality than Konami was expecting. So they sent the games out to press, and they sold out. So they sent another batch, and another batch, and another batch, and they sold out. So while Castlevania Symphony of the Night, as the game would come to be called, wouldn't do terribly well when it initially released, it would just keep selling month after month and year after year, and before long it had garnered a reputation as one of the best games on the PlayStation 1, and now it's widely considered to be the best game in the Castlevania series. So in the game, you take the role of Alucard, who goes to investigate a premature rising of Castlevania. Upon entering, he learns that Richter Belmont, the star of Rondo of Blood, seems to have been corrupted by the Dark Forces and has laid claim to Castlevania. So now Alucard has to make his way through the castle and stop Richter before things get too far out of hand. Though the plot of Castlevania is really simple, there are a lot of layers to it that make for a really interesting plot when you think about it. And what's cool about Symphony of the Night is that when the game first came out, a lot of people didn't realize that there was more to it than they initially thought. They would just find Richter somewhere in the castle, kick his ass, and then call it a day. But they realized if they further explored the castle, completed certain objectives, and equipped a certain item during the battle with Richter, that a whole nother section of the game would open up. And at that point, they realized basically that they had only played half the game. It was just one of the great surprises of the video game industry, and sadly, it's something that just can't happen anymore. These days, when a game is released, it's broken into almost immediately by hackers, so if a secret like that did exist today, it would be out in the open within a couple of hours of its release, so it was a really special moment for the Castlevania series. The presentation was also stellar for the time. In a time where everything had to be 3D, Castlevania Symphony of the Night dared to be a 2D game, and my god is it gorgeous. The Castlevania looks great, Alucard's design and animation is just beautiful. In fact, this was actually the first game to use the iconic Gothic art style that would come to define the Castlevania series for a couple of years. It still looks good today. There are a few 3D elements in there, but the game mostly relies on large, complex sprites, and it still holds up today. The soundtrack is also really good, though given the nature of how the game is designed, you're going to be hearing some tracks more than others, so it does wear itself out a lot quicker than the other Castlevania games do. But the main innovation with Castlevania Symphony of the Night was its structure. Rondo of Blood adopted a multi-path system through the game, so like you could get to a bunch of alternate levels throughout the game. But Castlevania Symphony of the Night takes it to another level with a bunch of different forks on the road that will lead you to various different places that you may or may not be able to get into. And as you explore the castle, you'll find more power-ups that will grant you new abilities that will allow you to access previously inaccessible areas. It's very similar to Castlevania, which is why the genre has come to be known as Metroidvania. Metroid invented it, Castlevania perfected it. That being said, I wouldn't necessarily say that Symphony of the Night perfected the Metroidvania. There are still some issues with this game, and it mostly comes down to pacing. The first hour or so of the game is kind of a slog because Alucard is so weak. But once you defeat the first couple of bosses and start to get new power-ups, it really starts to come into its own, and you'll be having a great deal of fun. That hidden half of the game I mentioned is also kind of a slog too, because all they really do is just flip the castle upside down, and what was once tightly designed platforming is now just broken level design. But all that's easy to look past considering all the content that's on offer in this game. There are so many different ways you can play this game, different options for equipables, weapons, power-ups that you can get. This is a game that is just so easy to break if you really want to, and it's just fun to do that. Like, there's just so many ways to play Symphony of the Night. Every time I play this game, I discover something new about it, so it's always fun to revisit, and I always do come back to it around Halloween. So yeah, Symphony of the Night has its issues, but it is still a really good game, and definitely one of the best games on the PlayStation 1. In fact, it's really overshadowed that 3D game that Konami was hyping up so much. Castlevania, or Castlevania 64 as it came to be known, was a less than stellar experience. It had all kinds of issues with its gameplay, the graphics weren't terribly strong, and it's widely regarded as one of the worst 3D adaptations of all time. It's a good thing that Symphony of the Night came out, because if it hadn't, there's a good chance that the series might have died right then and there. Some interesting things happened following the release of Symphony of the Night, though. Not too long after the game came out, Konami would release Circle of the Moon for the Game Boy Advance, which definitely took its cues from Symphony of the Night with its structure, essentially being another Metroidvania. But something really neat happened. Circle of the Moon became the first game in the series to ever sell 1 million copies, and because of that, Konami realized that their best bet for continuing the series was with the Metroidvania style and on the handhelds. So in order to do that, they gave Koji Igarashi, the guy who came up with a lot of the ideas for Symphony of the Night, the reins of the series for the next couple of years. And what would follow would be an outstanding string of games in the series. Harmony of Dissonance, Aria of Sorrow, Dawn of Sorrow, Portrait of Ruin, Order of Ecclesia. These are just some of the best games in the Castlevania series. And it was the longest tenure where the series had a shepherd. It would eventually come to an end with the Lords of Shadow series, but that's a story for another day. Symphony of the Night is fantastic and is still one of my favorite games on the PlayStation 1. But that's going to do it for Symphony of the Night, guys. Be sure to tune in tomorrow as we continue on with the PlayStation Retrospective.